I've been staring at the void for 2 to 3 months. I've done several rewrites, remakes, and overdoing of this video. I've made an effort to expose something that Victor has done to the stories of Sodor itself, and how this change forever impacts the series, and how the engines of Sodor are doomed because of one man's ambition to save them from scrap, only to realize that he's doomed them all to a horrific fate. Yes, my dear viewer, we are talking about SDC and how it dooms the engines of Sodor. This is the SDC theory. But first, let me explain my thesis. Experimental introduced us to the idea of putting a diesel engine inside the boiler of a steam engine. This conversion from steam to diesel is creatively known as SDC, or steam diesel conversion. And while many people have their own opinions on its realism, I've gone down a much darker route. Specifically, a theory I've developed to explain what the ramifications of SDC have on the stories of Sodor. And let me tell you that unknowingly, to even Victor himself, he has just doomed Barry and everyone who had the SDC operation. Let's begin. To start off, we need to explain what is actually happening with the conversion. Unlike how Victor portrayed it in the series, SDC is something that isn't really common, and for a good reason. See, the times steam engines have turned into diesel engines in real life, they were hit or miss. In a nutshell, they were either working just fine or absolute disasters. The way Victor seems to portray this is that the engine goes into the boiler with something connecting the wheels to the motor, with the tender carrying oil, probably connected via an auto coal hopper thingy James mentioned in Sodor Answers. Now, despite everything we've been told about SDC and how it's supposed to increase the longevity of steam engines, I think it does the exact opposite of this. Adam, Randolph, and Peter all died due to a form of metal fatigue. These 3 engines all have one thing in common. They were LMS engines, and being it was the largest out of all the companies, meant that its engines had to work hard. Essentially, the LMS ran their engines into the ground, leaving them with metal fatigue. Now, why exactly do I bring this up? It's really because of Barry, and how he was essentially updated to take on loads that a normal steam engine would have trouble with. Throughout the series, it has been shown that overworking an engine will lead to metal fatigue, and Barry in the episode Experiment is overworking himself. However, even with Barry's, psychological examination, if you want to even call it that, even if he was taking on normal loads, he's now going to have to take on more because of the 5 locomotives out of service. Barry will most likely be hard-pressed to do a lot of work. I predict that he will be on the main line temporarily until new engines arrive to replace the dead ones. But in that time, Barry will begin to develop metal fatigue, which is accelerated by the fact he has an engine in him. See, putting a diesel engine inside a steam engine has some real-life basis, however, not on a mass scale as Mr. Hall seems to do. And while many people say that this kills the series' logic, I think they're missing the point. SDC, overall, is just a band-aid on the problem of fuel and the cost it takes to maintain engines, and eventually, that cost can't be paid anymore. It doesn't matter if it's pushed on a large scale because the engines will eventually meet their fate, which leads me to the long-term consequences of SDC. Putting an engine inside a steam locomotive hasn't been widely adopted for a number of reasons, but one I want to highlight is the strain the engine will have on the metal. Diesel engines are designed to handle the engine they were given with. Steam engines do not have the same luxury. Putting an engine inside a steam locomotive will strain the parts within the engine, because it's not meant to handle that much power. And since SDC engines most likely will have their load increased, the strain will be more intense, which ultimately will end in middle fatigue. SDC is the fastest way for an engine to get middle fatigue by this point, and this means that if it is rolled out everywhere, then that means there will be a massive wave of middle fatigue affecting the engines, which will cause a strain on BR's finances. And that's not even the final nail in the coffin for SDC, because we have one more sort of thing to really destroy it in its entirety, and that is the 1973 oil crisis. If you're remotely familiar with history, then I think you know where I'm going with this. But for those who don't know, the Middle East came into conflict during the early 70s, causing a domino effect for the Arab nations to stop sending oil to the Western nations. Around the same time, coal prices in the UK skyrocketed because of the oil crisis. This is a very oversimplified lens of the entire story, so I linked a couple articles in the description below if you want more details. But suffice it to say, the UK faced an energy crisis. This of course will hit British railways like a truck. If they weren't already bleeding money, then they sure as hell were now. And while government owned, BR can't run on the government alone. This is where the harsh reality of BR scrapping its non-faceless steamies fully comes into view. Even if SDC works, the price of oil back then skyrocketed in price. BR simply can't handle the price tag to upkeep its older engines, and this is where I predict that the engines will have their rights revoked. Not only because Britain is in a severe financial decay, but it's also because of the car market. Toyotas, Hondas, etc. have taken over the car market, making it affordable and cheap to own a car. With all this, the age of steam within the stories of Sodor will soon begin to be chipped away, as financial priority takes over the rights of engines. This is why I predict that SDC is just a band-aid on the problem that will persist into the 21st century. A problem that the engines of Sodor and in the UK itself will take the full brunt of. And what remains is the scrap metal of what was once alive after years of service, condemned to such a hell. This is the ultimate conclusion of SDC. Its final result only entraps the steam engines in their own fate. And that was the SDC theory. Thank you for watching.